Welcome to the July 10th, 2024 meeting of the Town of Littleton Board of Health. We currently have a quorum of members. However, a couple of our members have some sudden scheduling conflicts that have come up. So we are going to probably just touch on the start of the agenda and potentially put off most of our discussions to another meeting so that we can involve more of our members, just to give everybody a heads up to that. But we will go ahead and jump in for our 7 o'clock meeting agenda. But right before we do that, I'm going to ask Dan his expertise. The agenda was posted, and this agenda item is described as a variance request, not a public hearing. So you or Francis, can you speak to what we should do?
Well, I'm obviously not a open meeting law attorney, and I try not to pretend to be one on TV. I think I don't know what the letter of the law would be. I think the intent here is probably relatively clear of what the item to be discussed is. It's a local upgrade approval for variance request at this address. Yeah, it doesn't say public hearing, so I think maybe by the letter it shouldn't count, but I think the intent is relatively clear. So I think if I had to flip a coin, I'd probably go, let's proceed. And if there's an issue, we can deal with it. But that's my gut, but that's not based on any really legal finding. I'm not sure if Francis has any input, and it's probably too late to try to get in touch with Diane to at 7 o'clock. So
I would say as long as it expressly indicates the intent of what the hearing will be about, which is the variance, that it would be okay.
Okay. I'm okay with that as well. So we will go ahead and dive in on it. And Kirk, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good evening. I'm Kirk Fitzpatrick with Civil Solutions, and I'm here on behalf of the Parkinsons for their property at 9 Paisley Road. And I'd be happy to share my screen with the septic plan. So basically what we have proposed for you is a septic upgrade for the existing 4-bedroom dwelling. I'll zoom in a little bit on the plan view here. So currently it's got a small tank off the back of the house, and that feeds an old leaching pit, and that's kind of got an overflow pipe to a kind of a leaching field over here in the corner that's currently breaking out to the ground surface. So because of the limited area in the backyard, we chose to do some test holes up on the front. We did test holes 1 and 2, where we had a sandy loam and an estimated seasonal high water table at 32 inches. And it was still dry, so we were able to run a perk test, and that perk test came back at 10 minutes an inch. So what we're proposing to do is to come out the back. It comes out under the basement slab, so we can't change the plumbing and potentially come out the front. So we're going to come out to a new 1,500-gallon 2-compartment septic tank that's going to flow to a 1,000-gallon pump chamber and pump the liquid up to the front to feed a system composed of the Presby EnviroSeptic. It's going to be 32 feet long by 16.5 feet wide. With that being said, we're requesting a reduction in the groundwater offset from 4 feet to 2 feet to minimize the height of the mounded system. And we're also asking for a reduction in the required offset from the inverts of the septic tank and the pump chamber from the minimum 12 inches down to 6 inches. The septic tank is actually, the inlet's probably close to the 12. And then just because we have to step down as we go to the pump chamber, the inlet of the pump chamber is 6 inches above the seasonal high water table. And we have specified that the tanks are going to be monolithic with H20 tops. They're to be ordered with boots to seal the pipes, and the risers are to be sealed to the tops of the tanks. And I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
So first I'll give it to Francis for your review and summary.
So based on what Jim's notes say, I agree as well. There's not many options here, so it seems like a feasible plan. I don't really know what else they'd be able to do.
We try to put it down here in the corner a little bit, but still maintain the 10-foot offset from the fill to the property line. With the finished grade over the top, it's going to be 103.6. So it's very similar to what the grade is at the street to try to minimize the height of it. If we shifted it more towards the road, the height of the system would increase just to meet the groundwater offset on the sloping ground. So that was our thinking as far as the placement of the system.
All right, I will read Jim McGraffy's notes on this property and request. Says the applicants would like to replace the failed sewage disposal system on their property. Soil testing was conducted, estimated seasonal water table was elevated 32 inches, and a favorable perk rate was obtained at 10 minutes per inch. The applicant is requesting a reduction of the groundwater offset for the leaching field and from the tank outlet inverts. The reduction of the groundwater offset for the leaching area will minimize the height of the mounded area in the yard and therefore minimize the potential for surface runoff to the existing dwelling and the abutting property. It will keep the system fill greater than 10 feet from the lot lines. The offset reduction for the tank outlet inverts is needed since the existing building sewer line exits under the basement slab. The new tanks will be installed to connect to the existing sewer line, which will result in the outlet invert elevations being less than 12 feet. I assume that means inches from the estimated seasonal water table. The tanks will be monolithic in construction with rubber connecting boots on the inlet and outlet ends of the tanks. The area is served by town water, and this proposed plan will provide a reasonable approach to the replacement of this failed system. So open it up for questions from the board. Kevin?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Kirk. Looks
Hi.
like a great plan. Just curious why you opted to use the Presby instead of the GeoMap.
Just because it's a little more tried and true method of disposal. The GeoMat, you might save a little bit in height, but I think this is the system that the homeowner preferred to go with.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Dan, any questions?
Nothing big. It looks like that it's going to be slightly raised towards that. Looks like southerly property line, but it doesn't look like a lot. And any additional runoff, it looks like minimal. And it's going to primarily the low point looks like it's the shed area on property. So even if you do have some runoff into the abutting property, it looks like it's going to be coming right back towards the shed on this property. So that would be my only question, but it looks like it's the way the natural grade is. It's not going to really affect anybody next door. So nope, looks like a reasonable system trying to solve a problem on a big lot, but not a deep lot. So nope, I don't have any other questions.
We have no attendees, so there are no abutters in the audience. So we can entertain a motion.
I'd like to, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the plan as presented and grant the variance for the 2-foot groundwater offset, as well as the change in the elevation from the tank inlets to be less than 12 inches from the high groundwater.
We have a motion
I'll second the motion.
and a second. Roll call vote. Kevin Baker,
Kevin Baker votes yes.
Dan Kane,
Dan Kane votes yes.
and Matt Wason votes yes. So variance is approved. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
So with that, gentlemen, should we pass on the remaining agenda items that we have for this evening? What are your thoughts? Kevin?
I'm happy to talk about the code of conduct quickly if you'd like, or we can wait for the entire board to do that. Or with 710, we can skip ahead to our mobile food truck regulation. I'm not sure if you would like a full board there for that, but I'm happy to talk about it if you guys are.
Dan, your thoughts?
But I'm certainly, again, I agree. I'm happy to discuss code of conduct if we have any items we want to address before it goes to the rest of the board on the next one. Mobile food truck regulations is a public hearing. Doesn't mean we can't table it for the next one. Yeah, I might be a little bit hesitant to act on it tonight, but doesn't mean we can't still discuss it if certainly if Kevin has updates or homework we need to do before our next meeting. You know, I'd rather hear that and get the homework started so that at our next one we have it done rather than put it off another 2 weeks before we even discuss outstanding items that we may be able to accomplish or address in the meantime. So I'm happy to do either way, but I'm also happy to chat as much as we'd like tonight.
Kevin?
Just a quick question for Francis. On the mobile food truck regs, what was our major issue that we had to take a look at as a board? Because I know we looked at it before.
So the major difference would be now the select board is not involved in the regulation. So in the packet, I included the original, which includes the Board of Selectmen. And then after that set is the new set that just has Board of Health specific food truck regulations. They're pretty standard. They just lay it out in a sequential way for people who might apply. So they realize what they're getting into ahead of time. It's hard to chase down food trucks and hard to get them to adhere to requirements. And a lot of towns don't exactly get it right. So some of the trucks that we get in town don't necessarily have the proper requirements in place that they should. I just talked to Bridget from Neshoba yesterday about this as well. So this regulation would make it very clear for food trucks what our expectations are when they come to the town. When they apply for the permanent line, they'll automatically receive this regulation.
And I know we'll come back to this in order, but one thing I'd ask is just for a red line so that because we'd already voted on and approved it, just so people could see that minimal change, like you're describing, this phrase got taken out so that people would feel comfortable that they could just re-vote on basically the same document. And while we have a quorum, I would feel better just to have more of the board present for that vote. But let's get to that. Why don't we have a little discussion? Our next agenda item 705, discussion on the Board of Health Code of Conduct. Who would like to start that conversation? Kevin.
Yeah, I think it's totally appropriate and important that we adopt the code of conduct. If adopting the code that was put out there by town clerk, that the one that the selectmen have, I think if we just tailor that to the Board of Health and board members, that should be I don't see a problem in adopting that.
I know we previously raised it, and I feel like the board was open to doing something. I thought that Kevin Davis was taking point on kind of updating that document to be, like you say, more reflective of our board. But I'm not sure if that ever got anywhere. So perhaps, Francis, we could hand that off to you and say, this is kind of the code of conduct that started, and make some initial edits just to clean it up, to give us something to review. Okay. Yep, Kevin.
I feel like if we have a red line copy to review of this and both the mobile food reg next week, we could probably get those done, or next meeting, we could probably get those done pretty quickly.
I agree. I think the food truck should be relatively quick. The code of conduct, I hope people will really read and absorb before the meeting. So depending on, Francis, when you would feel comfortable getting a draft out to us, I think people should have a full week before the meeting to review that if we plan on voting to adopt. So if that doesn't fit in your timeline, that's fine. I would say just let us know, and we can either put it on the next meeting or the subsequent meeting.
Mhm.
Okay.
Is there any members that, just glancing at it, think that there should be another section or any specific stuff for Board of Health that's been discussed before, so I can just put it in?
I don't recall anything specific that we talked about adding to it. My vague recollection was there were probably just some stuff that didn't apply as well, and so it needed removal. On our OneDrive share in the Board of Health documents, there is a code of conduct folder that might have something updated, but
Okay.
as I said, I wasn't the owner of that, so I'm not sure what was done.
As I say, I think for the code of conduct, I think some discussion points, but the big couple that jump out for me that we probably want to focus on, I'm sure there's other pieces in here that might want to clarify, was section 2, responsibility of the town administration. That requests for assistance or information from town only through the town administrator. We have a health director who exercises authority on behalf of the Board of Health. I guess it seems kind of odd that if we would like a mailing to go out to town hall or to go out to the community through the town, that we can't ask Francis as our health director to talk to the town administrator, that we would have to, that seems just like an oddly structured org chart. That I think we just want to clarify what that means. It seems like 95 or 98% of the things we would want should go through Francis. You are our person living in town hall with the authority of the Board of Health in most matters. Hey, can you talk about putting out a mailing or putting an article in the newsletter or whatever that item is? That seems like something that's pretty reasonable. The two other things, one was any section 4 part B, any Board of Health member violating the code of conduct may be subject to public censure by the select board. We don't answer to the select board, that we are an independent elected body with authority coming from the state, really, rather than town regs. So I guess it would be, well, certainly they're welcome to do whatever they'd like because we can't control their actions. It would seem more that a censure by the Board of Health for a member who is functioning outside the code of conduct would probably be more appropriate than the select board. I'm not sure. If we are voting for our code of conduct, I'm not sure why we'd put that in there that some other body is going to be publicly censuring us. I don't understand why we'd give that authority to someone else when we should be taking care of our own house.
Dan, if I could, I think this is just a straight copy from the select board code of conduct, and with some of the words changed, but that's it. So I agree. Obviously, we wouldn't go to the town administrator for that. The TA is to the select board as Francis is to us. And I agree. We just need to go through and remove all references to select board and then decide if every single one of those points still really does apply to us. So Francis, I would appreciate if you take that first stab of obviously the easy changes, and then I would appreciate your expert opinion on potentially some of the points that don't apply or shouldn't apply, or we might not want to adopt. And then if there are anything else that you think that we could add, we do not have to follow this to a T. This was simply a good starting point that the select board provided to us.
Okay. Good feedback.
So anything further on code of conduct? In that case, we'll move to our 7:10 public hearing on mobile food truck regulations. We talked briefly about it for a few minutes. We can chat a little more. I feel like we should wait to have more of the board to formally vote on it, but we have a quorum, so I can entertain any motion or discussion we would like to have. Kevin.
I think the last version that I saw was pretty well complete. So, unless you guys have any other comments or adjustments to it, which we can discuss tonight, it is a regulation, so I'm not sure how you feel about only having 3 members here. Of course, we've talked about that, but yeah, I'm on board with them, and let me know what you guys think. Love to hear it.
Thank you. Dan?
I think the regulations as presented under a Board of Health scope seem reasonable and appropriate. I know one of the questions, I think that kind of the select board piece that got pulled out was, how long they can be in one location and some of those kind of business operations rather than health and safety. I think this is covering health and safety pretty effectively, which is our scope and responsibility. So, what the select board or other regulatory bodies in town choose to do as far as business licensure and locations and those pieces. I think that's, well, certainly as a resident and a Board of Health member, I may have opinions. It's beyond the scope of the board, I think, but I think this version where we are is in a good place for the health and safety piece. So, I kind of agree. I would love to have for a regulation which has the enforceability of town bylaw. I'd love to have the entire board present, but I would also be okay moving forward if it's the will.
So one point that's just kind of a housekeeping point, and Francis, this is a ball that's going to go right to your court, is about when the permits should cycle on a calendar year. So this currently states permits will expire on December 31st of each year. I believe Neshoba used October, perhaps. Whatever the date is, one question I had was, would you like it to stay seasonal so that kind of food carts are roughly approved for a nice weather season, since most, I assume, operate more during the warmer months? Or would you like something that's more rolling, that whenever they decide to get their first license, then it's a year later for that?
Yeah, so most of them will wait till the spring to apply. I'm just thinking from an administrative standpoint, where if it's all online, when we do a food campaign where it sends out automatic letters to all food service providers, that would kind of fall under that umbrella. So it'd be easy for the admin to do it that way. Inspections will likely happen in May, though, when they start to go out in the warm weather.
And see that, and so that's where I actually almost wonder if, because part of the license is asking about where they will be operating and when they'll be operating, if they're a more permanent or a scheduled basis, should we actually target April 1st? Or, if I'm a food truck operator, am I thinking about where I'm going to work in Littleton in May if it's mid-December? So I think the October one always kind of threw me, because it was at the end of the season, but I feel like, is that when people are thinking about next year already? So I don't know. And I'd open up to anybody else if they had any suggestion, or if you were particularly wed to it, Francis, I'm happy to go along with whatever it is. Those are just my thoughts from kind of how it worked previously.
Yeah, I'm open to any thought on what month. I mean, typically we start to receive them at the end of April for the most part. But again, mine was just based on what was easier for an admin to be able to do in the cycle of permits.
Yeah, fair. Go ahead, Dan.
So I guess it's two things. So we'll start with the December 31st piece. If we expire December 31st and if they're reapplying, I don't want to have to worry about it. I never want my permit to expire, so I'm all over it. And here we are, January 1st, out there inspecting, or December 24th, inspecting food trucks in the snow. Is that really realistic? And now I've inspected them on December 24th, and the first time that we're ever going to see them in town is when the weather's good, so it's going to be in May. Is having an inspection closer to operational peak perhaps a better choice? Or we're going to say, okay, my permit runs out December. I'm not going to bother to reapply until it's getting close to business season and start over. I guess I'm kind of tossed up that way. And I'll also be, as I use the December 24th, I always kind of think of what else is going on around certain dates? Do you want to be having, I don't know how many we're looking at. If it simply expires, okay, that's no workload for expires other than a reminder that your thing's expiring. If we have 20 food trucks who all are being all on top of things and on December 15th say, here's my paperwork. But when do you want to inspect me so I can have a valid permit? That's a lot of workload in those last 2 weeks of December, which is often a busy time for people outside of the office. I'm just not sure of that piece of how we'd want to, because we can't issue a permit till they're inspected, right?
Right. So I inspect them before their first event. So regardless of whenever it gets renewed, when they say I have an event coming up this date, I say, okay, you got to swing by for an inspection of the truck before you can vend it, because their truck's not going to be prepared in December. So everything has to be on board. Water has to be available. All cleaning supplies, all food has to be stocked to show they can fit it. Some kind of wastewater plan. And also cleaning sanitation wise, we have to see if they have available sinks on board and that works for the tools that they have that they're going to use on a daily basis. So if they don't have that in place, we don't inspect them because it's just pointless. So typically, even when they apply early, we still wait till the week of the event when they're fully stocked, because then we'll know how their operation runs.
I guess just I guess I find it a little bit odd to issue a permit without ever having inspected them and then having theoretically an issued valid permit for months out there, but they're still not really approved to work yet. So what does that permit mean if they're not actually approved to work until they get an inspection to finalize the permit? You know what I mean? So I guess I'm just trying, I'll be honest. If I get a permit in hand, I've got a permit in hand as far as I'm concerned. And I could easily see someone who may not be as thoughtful or may not make the phone call saying, hey, I get a phone call at 4 p.m. on Friday afternoon to come do a gig here in town at 6 p.m. I have a permit in hand. I'll be there. I'm happy to pick up your check and provide you food. I'm just kind of thinking of if they've got a valid permit, we basically said you're licensed to work here in town without a valid inspection. I guess I'm just a little bit concerned about that. I'm just not sure how best to make that aligned.
Or Dan, is it that they reapply for their new permit, but they don't actually get it for months until they get that inspection done?
And then has anything changed in between those two dates?
Because it's just it'll sit in a queue for several months until they decide to call up and say, hey, I'm finally ready to start working. Can you come give me an inspection so that we can finalize my permit application? Is that describing how it works, Francis, in your mind?
I've never had a food truck actually apply in December. They always wait till they're about to go off and vend before they apply.
Okay, so then that's
Yeah.
kind of what I'm wondering. Because if I get an email in mid-December that says your permit expires on December 31st, is there a button that I can say, would you like to renew now? I'm going to click, renew to get it off my list of things to do. But if you don't think
Sure.
people will do that, or if you don't care that they all just die on December 31st and sometime in April and May people start to apply new, then I don't really care about the process. I'm just curious if it's easier on them in any way, or you, from the paperwork perspective, if they can click renew now on April 1st, does that make it easier at all, or does it not matter?
For me, it typically hasn't mattered in the past, but Dan makes a very good point. So we can make it April 1st. That should cover us from any type of seasonal truck.
And obviously we can change in the future if it doesn't work right.
Sure.
I'm just kind of asking that question of just, is it a provisional until they're inspected and then it's finalized? I don't know. Whatever works. I just want to make sure that if we're granting a permit without the inspection, that there's some recognition or understanding that it's a permit, but not really. It's a provisional until you're inspected, or make sure that language is clear, either in the regs or on the form or both, just so that there's no confusion for anyone out there.
Well, yeah, Dan, like I say, they type all their information in online and click submit, but they don't get a permit back immediately. it still has to wait for the rest of the boxes to be checked before the system would even say your permit is approved, right? Brenda has her hand raised. So Brenda, what can you add?
Well, I just want to let you know there's someone in the attendees, and I'm not sure if that might be Gino. It just has numbers on the. Just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Thank you. Attendee 367500166.
Do you
Gino,
hear me?
is that you?
Can you hear me?
That is you, Gino.
Thank you.
Let me promote you real quick. Okay, I had two other points that I wanted to chat briefly. One was about scheduling. Francis, it's not jumping out at me as to where they are supposed to inform us as to their schedule. Am I not seeing it?
I thought I put something about the route and hours in there. It is in the permit application, though.
Okay,
I'll double check.
I believe you because I thought I had seen it previously. It's just not jumping out at me right now. But
Yeah.
one thing we talked about offline was I was of the opinion that perhaps we need some call out in there that for food trucks that have a regular schedule, I get those. I'm not as worried about those. But for food trucks that get a permit to operate within Littleton, but their schedule is very dynamic or they get hired on, only a couple weeks notice and they come in, I feel like the health department, should be notified when a food truck is going to operate in Littleton so that our health director can know that that is happening. In terms of any sort of safety outcome, if we find out that something bad happened, somebody got a foodborne illness one day from a food truck, and we had no idea the food truck was operating, even if they were properly permitted licensed, I feel like there's a gap there that we weren't aware of and couldn't necessarily respond to something faster. I don't know logistically how to deal with it. Like I said, it's easy enough if I say, well, I always operate at this address on these days all year long. But what about those food trucks that are going to come in on a more as moment notice? And should we have a call out in this policy that says, if you are, give us your schedule, but now if you are ever going to be here on another day, you need to notify the health department.
Yeah, I remember you said that now. I can add a line in the permit and also in the regulations saying we need maybe 48 hours notice before any event or 24 hours notice.
I mean, I would leave that kind of up to you. I wouldn't expect it would need to be a ton unless you feel you needed to do something in advance, but it's more of just making sure that you know, and if you're curious, you do a drive-by, or if they're a particularly troublesome client, that perhaps you check it out. But just to make sure it's on the book so that we all feel comfortable knowing that it's been checked out. And so if somebody, goes to an event and sees a truck and we don't know anything about it, or is driving down the street and sees something, that way it works as a red flag. So we can go, wait a minute, while they're licensed or not, I don't remember knowing about this. So let me just make sure things are all hunky-dory.
Yeah, point well taken. I can put some language in.
Cool. Any other thoughts on that topic, Dan or Gino?
I would agree. A simple one line in there that, either will be the permit holder will notify the department of their regularly scheduled locations. Anything outside of that will be 24-hour or whatever that notice is, just so we know they're operating in town. Because we could have someone with a permit who comes to town twice a year, or someone with a permit who's here 5 days a week, 6 hours a day in different spots. So that person we see twice a year, 3 times a year, it's nice knowing that they're here in town operating and simply be aware. I agree. And that we just need to make sure it's in the regs, not only the permit application, because a permit application isn't necessarily a binding document where the regs are.
And just for the record, Gino Fredoloni has joined us. Welcome, Gino. And Kevin Baker has had to depart, I believe. So we still have a quorum, but it has changed. And then the last point, which potentially we need to have a little more discussion about, because I brought this up very briefly, and I think we didn't have enough time to kind of chew on it, was currently our enforcement and all of this regulation focuses solely on the food truck operator themselves. And I'm wondering if the organizer or the client of the food truck or the property where the food truck is going to operate should have any sort of responsibility here. Because we have seen properties or individuals hire a food truck, and whether it's their own fault or not, it turns out the food truck is not properly permitted and licensed to operate in Littleton. And if the food truck says, yeah, we're fine, but you go look at our list of approved food trucks and they're not on there, should the, as I said, organizer or the hirer of the food truck have some sort of responsibility there? Brief conversation that we had with Francis and I believe Kevin, that the sense was that, yeah, maybe we should have something like that, a similar warning and fine system for that, because if you're hiring a food truck to be on your property and serve people, should you have some responsibility? But like I said, I feel like that warrants more discussion and understanding from our whole board, but would be happy to hear kind of initial comments or thoughts. Obviously, I just threw it out there. Go ahead, Dan.
I think no, it's a great question, and I'm a little bit torn. I'm trying to like see if we can normalize this or standardize this across other things. That if I hire as a homeowner an electrician or a plumber who says they're a licensed electrician or a licensed plumber and they come in, I'll be honest, I don't necessarily go to the board of registration and electricians and check their license number and their current insurance status. This is like, I get, should I? Probably. I haven't hired an electrician in a long time. But I guess kind of like are we adding an additional burden which wouldn't be applied for other things? And we kind of get to that prudent person piece of if I can hire a plumber or an electrician or those things and they say they're licensed, and if they're not, they're bad. I might pay the price, but they're the bad actor and will be subject to, discipline and action. I'm not sure if the average prudent resident would treat a food truck any different than they would a plumber, an electrician, or a trash company, or any of those other pieces. I'm just not sure if someone would take that next step. And are we being unreasonable to expect them to take that next step that, hey, Dan's Pizza Truck Company, are you licensed in Littleton? Yes, I am. Awesome. We want you here Friday for a party. For a lot of folks, that's the end of the conversation. When I'm not sure if that's necessarily, I don't necessarily think it's unreasonable, but I think it might be a little bit less likely to occur. And then are we just setting ourselves up for a regulation that really isn't easy to apply or reasonable to apply, or is only going to be applied when something bad happens? And then that's a whole different discussion rather than did you check to see if they had a permit if something bad happens. Now we're, pick your bad thing of choice. But I'm just not sure how practical it is in real life and how similar it would be to other regulations, and therefore how reasonably enforceable is it. I don't know. It's a discussion point. I'm not sure.
So thank you for that. And obviously I threw this out there, and so you're right on, I threw you on the spot. I would say the other viewpoint is that if I go to some commercial property and a business and there is a food truck that they have arranged and basically advertised as, this food truck is here today to serve your needs, and I should feel safe, right? And so who's ultimately responsible? And I think as soon as you start to have that association and there's some sort of contract between that business and that food provider, that I think that's where kind of Kevin and I, when we chatted about this, where it's more of a, I've signed a contract. I do have some responsibility to make sure I just got some ownership of the potential problem. But I agree. I would like to throw it out there, and maybe we can put it out in an email, or Francis, if you drafted, a couple sentences that would cover this in the regulation. If that's again something we could get out to people in advance so that they could chew on it before our meeting, so that we could have a good discussion about it. Because I don't want to make a snap decision on it. I think we want to be really thoughtful about it. Because you're right, Dan. Where does it really go, and is it easy enough to enforce and monitor and keep track of?
I think it is a little bit different that me having a party for my 15-year-old, maybe a different conversation as a private resident, having friends over for a party is different than a commercial entity utilizing a food truck as a commercial partner. I mean, I think that could be a different discussion, because me as a resident with 10 kids over having some pizza is different than, nope, I'm a commercial retailer of some kind and I'm partnering with another business to come in and provide a service. I think those could be two different discussions. Because now, rather than a small neighborhood or friends or whatever, that is different than I'm operating commercially, but for a private party, is different than I'm operating commercially for all comers. And I'm doing that all comers in conjunction with someone else. If I'm parking in your parking lot, but we have no relationship, I'm an independent. If we are been contracted in to be at a public business or a public event, being hired by a public, not public as in little p public, not big P public organization, a commercial venture for the public, I do think those might be different. And I think that discussion could be divided, when it's a commercial entity hiring versus a private entity or either private business or a private resident is different than, Dan's Brew House, and I've hired, Ben's pizza truck to be here every Friday night and come down and get your beer and pizza. That might be a little bit different.
That's a good point.
I'm not sure how to document that or describe that in regs at the moment off the top of my head.
That does bring up the question. I know, Francis, you dealt with that language previously of, is there a sphere where I don't need a proper permit if it's for a private function at somebody's house, or does that still fall into you have to have a proper permit?
Technically, any food truck, regardless of what the event is required to be registered with police and have a permit to operate from the Board of Health.
Okay, so then it would fall to, if we wanted to do this, create some language about if you're a commercial entity hiring the food truck versus a private individual hiring the food truck, and maybe that's sufficient. I don't know if that'll draw the line clearly enough, but yeah, interesting.
I'll throw it out to the board and we can figure it out.
Okay. I believe those are the last comments I had on it. Gino, just to bring you up, we've obviously talking about the mobile food truck regulation.
Yeah, I understand that.
It's a public hearing, so we're not going to vote on it tonight. If we, I would like us not to vote on it, but we have a quorum. So if you guys made a motion, I guess we would do that. But I would rather have more of the members here to discuss it further. But if there's anything that you had in the current draft that you wanted to ask a question about, or ask for clarity, or ask for changes, now would be a good time to do so.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Gino.
Okay. I think it's a good idea, like you say. You're asking questions. The only time I think you had to ask for licenses because you never met this individual with the carrying the truck and everything, food, and then it's different when you know somebody that it came prior, and you know he already has a license. But it's nice that they just ask if you never met this gentleman and with the truck and everything, would you be kind enough to show me your license? Very simple, diplomatically, and then is serve the purpose. And when they come back the next time and you remember who they are, and said, you didn't have any problem, did you? And they say no. If they say yes, then they say, can you show me your license? Was taken away from you or whatever? But you know the individual.
No, you bring up a good point too, because one of the only times I've ever asked to see a license, they had to kind of dig it out of the truck glove box, as it were. And I know the reg says it must be conspicuously posted in a place visible to all customers. But if I'm a food truck operator licensed in 6 different towns, I'm starting to run out of real estate to show all of these licenses.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe we should tell them they should get a little flip chart so they can flip it around to the correct one for the town they're operating in. But yeah, it's a point. You know, anybody walking up to one should be able to see the license someplace reasonably easily, so they know that that it's current and it's from Littleton. So I feel good here. Right. Good point. Okay, if there's no further discussion on mobile food truck regulations,
I make a motion that we continue the public hearing for mobile food truck regulations.
thank you, Dan. We have a motion
A second.
and a second. Great. Roll call vote. Gino Fratelloni.
Go ahead. Yes.
Thank you. Dan King.
Dan Kane votes yes.
And Matt Wason votes yes. Continue this public hearing to our next meeting. Our next agenda item is the 7:15 discussion on room count policy. Unless somebody feels very strongly about it, I would like to punt that to our next meeting when we have our larger board members. Take that as an affirmative. And next is our 7:20 agenda item on the infectious disease decision support tool, which I can share. So the latest current predominant agent of COVID Omicron is KP2. It's the same variant that we mentioned last time. It is just growing in its percentage. Vaccination data is out of date. We're not going to talk about that right now. The wastewater numbers have started jumping up out of Boston. So that's curious. We're going to keep an eye on that. But the Littleton weekly case counts you see on the right are very flat. But the case counts across Massachusetts are definitely on an upswing. So we're kind of back to asking people to be aware and pay attention to those symptoms. And if you start having cold or flu-like symptoms or anything else that could be COVID related, please pay attention to that. It's obviously the summertime, so people tend to be less likely to get ill. So if you are having symptoms, it could be COVID. And so please try to protect those around you and in the public. And our arbovirus update is now live. Massachusetts is tracking. In case you saw the news, where I think we might have mentioned it last time, that there was a positive test for EEE down in I forget what county, but Littleton is still classified as low risk for both EEE and West Nile virus as of July 10th. That's today. But as usual, please practice good mosquito prevention methods. So make sure you're wearing bug spray when you're out and about around bugs. And there are lots of tips on how to keep your yard kind of mosquito free from keeping open areas so that mosquitoes don't nest nearby and land nearby, and making sure you don't have standing water sitting around. So lots of tips that you can get on our webpage, correct, Francis? Yes. as well as the CDC and other resources. Go ahead, Francis.
There's also on the main homepage for the town, we sent out a news alert for the tested mosquitoes along with tips that anybody can view right from the main page itself under news and events.
Perfect. Thank you. That's what I have for infectious diseases. Any questions or other comments? Very well. That ends our timed agenda items, leaving it to our administrative matters. We have meeting minutes for June 12th and June 26th up for approval. Before we go further than that, the June 12th, we previously punted in order to get another review and some grammatical fixes. It doesn't appear that that has happened, so I would like to punt that one again if it pleases the board. I'll take that as an affirmative, which brings us to the June 26th. The three of us were present at that meeting. Have you had a chance to review those minutes? Dan's nodding his head. Gino, have you read the minutes from June 26th?
I make a motion to accept it. It's June 27.
I'll second the motion to accept the minutes for June 26, 2024.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes for June 26th. Roll call vote. Gino Fratelloni,
Yes.
Dan Kane,
Dan Kane votes yes.
Matt Wason, yes. So the minutes from June 26th are approved. Next, we have correspondence. I am not aware of any correspondence for discussion. Does anybody else have anything?
No.
Francis?
So I talked to Bridget from Neshoba, and she has asked us to look in on the taco truck at Gary's stand. Apparently they've been having some compliance issues lately, so I'm just letting the board know that I will be out inspecting them and seeing how it goes.
Okay. Thank you. And lastly, any other updates, member comments? Gino, anything else to discuss?
No, thank you. I think you did a good job.
Thank you. Dan?
I have nothing to share at the moment.
And I do not have anything else to throw out. Francis, anything for you?
So we sent out 2 press releases last week, one for the mosquitoes, and then a second one for the extreme heat alert for the week. Tips on how to stay cool and avoid heat-related illnesses. Those are on the main homepage of the news and events.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I was going to give a shout out for that. I appreciate the heat awareness information. I think that's a benefit instead of just being a, hey, by the way, our cooling shelters are available at these times. Providing a little more information in that email, I think was a valuable service. That concludes our agenda for the meeting. Yes, Dan?
So a quick one for Francis. I know for that first heat emergency we had, 3 or 4 weeks ago, we put out the announcement and we had the cooling center announcements. I don't remember seeing an official, we put out one, but I don't remember seeing one from kind of the town or emergency management basically activated the cooling centers. We just have the information. 1, I may have just missed it. 2, do we have kind of a standard trigger or is there a discussion that we are activating the emergency plan, or we're just sharing information? So I guess I'm just like, we're on day 3 now of heat advisory here. Did we activate the heat emergency plan with cooling stations and transportation and all those cool pieces, or is it just informational? And how is this different than the last one?
Sure. So during the last heat wave, I was not included in the chain conversation about cooling centers, and I was walking around asking people in town hall about, like, how do we do this? Where do we do this? So I did get connected with the right people eventually, but it was already later. Police issued something on Facebook about cooling centers. Typically, they will be at the EHS office during regular business hours, and then after hours, police and fire have segregated rooms where they can put people after hours. Typically, they say the most people they've gotten, like, is at like 2 during a heat wave in general, but they say usually it's 0 people. So now we'll be involved in the chains, and basically it's between town administration, police, fire, and EHS, and now health. We'll discuss when a cooling center must be opened and how we coordinate that.
Awesome. Thank you.
So to follow up on that, they are not open right now or have not been open this week.
Essentially, they're just kind of open, but no one stated it publicly. So it probably would have been worth doing something formally in the press release, hindsight, but they pretty much take anybody at any given time.
Yeah. Okay. But I agree with Dan. Kind of, this has come up every year. I feel like a little bit to say, I feel like a more formal process, just so it's clear. It's great that they're open, but if nobody got that information at the beginning of the week that they will be available, I think that's a miss. We did great the first one, and then I think that piece was missed on this one. I'm not sure where the breakdown would be, but if it's because we don't have kind of a standard process to follow. So yes, I would appreciate if you follow up with that group and say, let's just make sure, whether it's not highly utilized or not, let's make sure that the information goes out before people need it so that they know that that service is available when they do need it.
Good point.
Cool. If there's nothing further,
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
motion and a second. Roll call vote to adjourn the meeting. Gino Fratelloni,
Gino Fratelloni, yes?
Dan Kane,
Dan Kane votes yes. Thank you, everyone.
Matt Wason votes yes. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for helping us keep